Okay, so first of all, thank you for inviting me to UCL. I'm going to move the focus of discussion towards data, and I'm going to be talking about this notion of open data by default. And let me start off by telling you where that's come from. So earlier this year, the G8 science ministers met, led by David Willetts, and they produced an open data charter. Quick show of hands, how many people have heard of the Open Data Charter, the G8 Open Data Charter? Okay, so an interesting document, quite short, but that's where the Open Data by Default principle comes from. So there are, you can see that the Open Data Charter lists 5 principles about data sharing, about data quality, and about releasing data and reusing data. So, also on a global scale, there's an initiative called the Research Data Alliance, and that's been led by funding agencies, research funding agencies in 3 continents, the National Science Foundation in the US, the European Commission, and the Australian government. And they've come together to form this initiative, which is looking at breaking down the barriers to facilitate data sharing. And there's a whole number of working groups and interest groups. I chair one of the interest groups. And we've had, so far, we've had 2 plenary meetings. The next one's going to be in Dublin, Ireland. And it's working at both a technical level and also a cultural level to try and facilitate data sharing. So that's all happening globally. So what about in some of the countries of the world? This has been mentioned already, very briefly. So in the US, Barack Obama, his administration put out this executive order earlier this year to open up data. So it was a directive to open up public data from all sorts of different sources across the US. And this was a historic initiative. And also in the US this year, there were a number of open science champions of change identified. Here they are. They were given their awards at the White House. And interestingly, Paul Ginsberg, who I think was mentioned earlier, he initiated the Physics Open Access Repository Archive. So he's there on the left. And a number of other data science champions of change. And I just want to mention someone I've had the privilege of working with, Stephen Friend. So Stephen leads an organisation, a not-for-profit called StFire Networks. So he's a health scientist, and he's initiated a series of challenges, 5 challenges, all focusing around open data. And this is the first one that he set up, and this was in partnership with the DREAM initiative, which is a systems biology initiative. So this was a challenge to use the StFire Networks platform, which is called Synapse, to use the data that's available through that platform, the open data, to try and identify new biomarkers for breast cancer. And so this was thrown open to the world. Lots of different teams, I think over 300 teams of scientists took part. Some of the sort of big names and also some sort of smaller groups. And something that, I mean, that's innovative in itself. But something that was also quite innovative was the prize. Now you may be familiar that there's quite a lot of these sort of challenges thrown open on the web, and quite often the prize is cash, it's dosh. But in this particular case, it was slightly different. So Stephen decided that he wanted a slightly different model. So I'm going to read this out, because you may not be able to see it in the back there. A testament to Friend's belief that money is not driving participation, he and his colleagues did not offer a high-dollar bounty to BCC winners. Rather, the prize was a publication in Science Translational Medicine, a reward that organisers refer to as a powerful intellectual currency, Friend said. For the BCC, the journal's editors scrapped the usual system of blind peer review and instead they selected reviewers to be embedded within the competition itself. The editors also helped develop criteria for determining the winning models, and if these criteria were not met, there would have been no winner and therefore no publication. Despite these stipulations, the publication of the prize model was a ringing success, with the BCC attracting some 350 teams from 30 countries. And the winning teams model, and they came from Columbia University, met science translational medicine's criteria and got itself a spot in the journal. So I think that's quite an interesting approach to using open data to solve some real scientific challenges. The UK government is also putting some initiatives behind open data. You're probably familiar with the Open Data Institute, which opened its doors last year. Tim Berners-Lee is very much part of that. And they've also set out some open data challenges. In this case, particularly focused at helping SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, to use and reuse data. And then focusing on some sort of more social science areas. So that's all great, that's all at the global and national level. But here we are in UCL. And I think perhaps now what I'd like to do is focus on what the institutions are thinking about in terms of data. And we know that research is data intensive. And before this meeting, I was admiring the exhibition just outside in the Octagon. And by pure chance, I also have some examples from the Bartlett. And this is the sort of data-intensive science that's happening at UCL. So this is some developments of some mashing and mundering, if you like, to produce new information, new knowledge, to make it more widely available. So up there on the top left is a cycling census map, which coincidentally is out in that exhibition. And there's money. The research funders are providing new money to do data-intensive research, and here's an award that CASA has just been awarded from ESRC, from the Economic and Social Science Research Council, focusing on data mining. So with this in mind, we can look at what the research councils are doing in the data space. And back in 2011, the EPSRC, the Engineering and Physical Science Research Council, published their policy framework on research data. And this was quite, let's say it caused waves. It caused waves because it set out a number of principles and expectations that it expected recipients of its funding to comply with. And it was very much focused at the institutional level. So one of those expectations was that every institution would have a roadmap that described how it was going to facilitate the management and curation of research data. So Bath, where I'm based, University of Bath, received quite a lot of EPSRC funding, and so we developed a roadmap to meet the requirements of EPSRC. And I'm sure UCL's got a roadmap. But this is a snapshot from the Bath roadmap. And just to give you an idea, at the top there is the first expectation, and the whole roadmap lists each of the 9 expectations that were set out by EPSRC, and then it describes what activities the institution needs to do to meet those expectations, both in terms of objectives and actions, in terms of milestones, because EPSRC set some target dates for some of this to happen, mainly in 2015. And on the right there, a really quite important column, roles and responsibilities, because if you think about it, the data that is generated by you as researchers are the crown jewels of an institution. And there are a lot of stakeholders involved, from perhaps IT services providing storage, perhaps to PVC research, to the library, to the research support office, to the legal office, and so on. So there's a lot of players involved. So this was our attempt to, if you like, plot the plan of activities and actions that had to take place to make sure Bath met with those expectations. So the EPSRC focus is very much on the institution. But if we go to another research funder, here's MRC, Medical Research Council, they tend to focus on the PI, on the researcher themselves, on the individual, on you. And that's a screenshot from the MRC policy on data sharing, and it describes what they're expecting a PI who submits to an MRC grant application process to do. And one of the things they're expecting is a data management plan. So a quick show of hands here, how many people in the audience have done a data management plan? Oh, well, that's good. Very good, good. So one of my hats is as Associate Director of the Digital Curation Centre, DCC, and we've provided some tools to help you develop data management plans. So if you don't know about these, do go and have a look. We've also provided what I hope is a helpful listing of the policy requirements of different research funders. That's on the DCC website, so you can go and have a look at that. These slides will be available, so you can see that later. So but it's very much a focus on the researcher. Bath has taken it a step further. You may also have done at UCL, and we've developed some institutional templates for data management plans, again to help the busy researcher to comply. So this is really positioning the university as a data publisher. And that means there needs to be infrastructure in place to support that data publication, to help them manage the data, curate it, and make it available for the longer term. And there are a number of different repository platforms that are being explored by lots of different institutions as possible platforms for data deposit. And there are lots of areas that need to be considered. I've described some of them in an article which I've plugged there. One of those is risk. And it's risk to the institution and reputational risk. And let me just share this with you. So this is an editorial from Organic Letters, chemistry journal from earlier this year. And again, I'll read it out so that people in the back can see. So this is an editorial about data integrity, and this is the editor. I write to alert the organic chemistry community to a serious problem related to the integrity of data being submitted for review and publication by Organic Letters, and to outline steps that the journal is taking to address this concern. Recently, with the addition of a data analyst to our staff, Organic Letters has begun checking the submitted supporting information more closely. As a result of this increased scrutiny, we have discovered several instances where reported spectra have been edited to remove evidence of impurities. Such acts of data manipulation are unacceptable. So this is a recent editorial flagging up that journals are starting to look at supplementary data, at the claims that an article makes based on the data. So I think that's quite an interesting thing to consider. So coming back to the institution again, it means that services like libraries, information services, IT support services, research support services are starting to develop a whole range of new data-oriented services to support you, the researchers, so that your data is well managed. And some of those might be a repository, it might be the development of a data catalogue so that other people can find your data. It might be providing support for citation so that other people can cite your data. Associated with that, when you submit a publication to a journal, you get a DOI or some sort of identifier. So we're looking at applying DOIs to data sets so that you can cite a particular unique identifier along with your ORCID ID. And then there are also emerging, and I haven't got time to talk about that today, different and new formats for publishing data papers, executable papers. And then we come on to data peer review, which again is quite a challenge, I think. And data metrics, how do you measure and monitor the impact of your data sets that are now available for sharing, for reuse, for mining. And we've had mention of metrics and services like Impact Story. So that's all kind of happening now. What I want to do just for the last part of my talk is to think about some of the challenges that are still out there. Think about what we need to do in the future. And the first challenge, from my perspective at least, is the cost, is the money. So there have been some quite interesting articles in the New York Times and in Science highlighting the challenge of, well, we're all trying to make this data globally available, to make it shareable, reusable. That's going to require all this infrastructure that I've just been describing. Who's going to actually pay for that? And this has been recognised by research funding organisations as well. That's a quote from Alan Bratecki at NSF. And so to try and get to the bottom of some of this, the DCC held a forum, a research data management forum, earlier this year in April. There I am chairing this panel. The panel are representatives from the research funders, so there's pretty much each research council there and the Wellcome Trust. And it was a very interesting discussion. We asked the community to provide questions to that panel about the cost of data management and data infrastructure. And there was a lot of questions, and the panel did their best to provide answers. You can see the answers up on the DCC website. There was a formal response from both the Wellcome Trust and the RC UK members. It did emerge that research funders will basically pay for the direct costs of data during the course of a project, but they're expecting the institution to pick up the bill for longer term preservation and sustainability of the data. So there's a challenge. So my second challenge, if you like, is about capacity and workforce building. And it's been quite nice to see that there are a whole load of new posts emerging, adverts for job descriptions for new positions across the UK, in fact across the world. And this is nice because there have been a number of papers, of reports, which have advertised the shortage of data scientists, of data curators, data managers, and predicting problems because of that. So some institutions have created business plans that have justified funding for new positions to support open data. But associated with that are the skills and competencies that are required to support the researchers. So this is an initiative that we've been working with the University of Melbourne in Australia, a project called Immersive Informatics, where we're aiming to develop a course to train professional support services and researchers in data management skills. And it's called Immersive Informatics because it's a sort of traditional 10-module course, but 2 of those modules position the professional support staff, that's the library staff or the IT support staff, research support staff, in the lab at the coalface with the researcher. So they kind of co-curate some data. And there's a pilot just finishing at the University of Melbourne now, and we'll be reporting on that in future conferences. So my third challenge area should just really be called cultural change, but I've called it advocacy and incentives. And I mean, you're all here, hopefully you know quite a lot about open data, but there's a lot of researchers out there who aren't aware of the impact of open data, the potential of open data, and what we can do with it. So there's a whole new advocacy program needed, rather like the very successful advocacy that's been granted to open access publications, so that we can change researcher behaviour towards open by default. And I'm sure that you're doing training of new entrant researchers here at UCL. We certainly are at Bath, primarily through doctoral training centres. It's a great way to reach the new blood coming into the system. And then I think the ref has been mentioned already. So we're about to hit the current ref, but what's going to happen next? What's going to happen with the next research assessment framework, or whatever it's called? Will it be broader in scope? Will data sets be in that? I don't know. If data was more formally and explicitly part of a research assessment exercise, I think it would be a game changer. It would change overnight. So, almost at the last slide, I'll leave you with 9 simple ways to make your data easier to reuse. This is a nice paper in PeerJ, and it's been published by a group of biologists at Utah State University. So share your data, actually do it. Provide metadata. Provide your data in a raw or unprocessed form. Use standard data formats. Use good null values. Make it easy to combine with some contextual data so people can understand what the data is about. Do some quality control. Use a trustworthy repository and an established open data license. And I really will leave you with a plug for the DCC Conference. The next one, we're on to the 9th, is in San Francisco in 2014, and we're very privileged to have Atul Butte, who's one of those Obama Open Science champions. He's going to be one of the opening keynotes in San Francisco. So we'd love to see you over there. The program has just gone up, and we're open to receive submissions. So I really will totally leave you with the references, and thank you for listening.
So, 5 minutes for questions or comments to Liz on open data. I see a couple of hands here, so the gentleman at the back and then one further forward here.
Is that on? Yeah. Hi, I'm John Clayton from the Institute of Channel. I was just wondering, given the fact that there's a lack of incentive, shall we say, to say the least, for reproducing existing studies, and the fact that some fields benefit more than others from a kind of accumulation, I guess, of I'm sorry, yeah.
Right.
Sorry, I think it's fair to say that some areas of science benefit more than others from a kind of accumulation of material where the kind of gaps that gradually get filled in. And the fact, as I said, that there's not really much incentive. People are not really encouraged to reproduce existing work, even though it would be good. I'm just kind of wondering, how is it envisaged that? Assuming that say 90% of all data generated sort of is available publicly, what proportion would actually be regularly used?
Very hard to say. But I think Stephen Friend's data challenge, and that's one of 5, the one that I showed you, illustrate what potential is if that data is out there and available. And we really don't know what we can do with data if, as you suggest, that percentage of data is openly available for use and reuse. But I
it's
think
a lot of money to put on something when you don't have a particularly strong idea.
Yeah, I think probably there will be Nobel Prize winners based on data reuse. I predict. Data analysis. Eventually. Big prizes will be based on that. Cost, as I said, is an issue, and I think in terms of culture change, we're seeing amongst the new entry researchers at Bath, they're much more willing to share their data, much more willing.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I have no problem with the principle of exchange data. I think it's a very worthy principle.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it's an expensive one to actually carry out. So
Yeah.
the question has to be raised.
Yeah,
how much
and
of
it has
really
been.
we need.
Yeah, and it has been. And as I say, the meeting of research funders that we ran in April was really just the start of that discussion. I think there's a lot more to be had.
So time for one more question in this round, and I think Aaron Kelly will hand over the microphone.
Hi, Henry Potts from the Centre for Health Informatics. I'm in the health sciences. Most of my data comes from people who have signed consent forms that have been approved by ethics committees. Is there support for what we should say in those consent forms? Is there support that's going to teach ethics committees what this is all about?
That's a good question. And we have an ethics committee at Bath. I've spoken to the ethics committee at Bath. There are some really quite nice guidelines produced by the UK data service in Essex, who have similar issues with a lot of their data because it's human subjects. I like the phrase managed access because some of the data, that sensitive data referring to human subjects or whatever, perhaps should not be shared. And whilst there are anonymising algorithms, those can be broken. So we're in a very early stage, I think, of communicating and understanding some of the ethical dilemmas that arise. There was that very nice paper in Science which identifies some of the unexpected ethical issues that arose from sharing some patient data, discovery of other issues, that we really haven't got to the bottom of yet. So I think there's a lot of discussion around the moral dilemmas in the open data space that we need to still have.
Okay, thank you.